The Money Show with Moteo Haripe
on 702. Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, proud to support Genza Energy's investment in the infrastructure powering West Africa's growth. Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday edition of The Money Show. Lots to cover today. The JSE had a lot of results come out. Discovery are saying they're expecting better earnings. Blu Label Telecoms having a new future outside of Cell C. And also some great numbers from Bidcorp as well. So we'll look at those numbers later on the show. But a big story out of the US, one every parent will want to hear about, where Meta Platforms, the owners of Facebook and Instagram, basically settling out of court in that social media addiction case in the US. They were facing federal charges from 29 US states accusing them of abusing their power in the industry by firstly designing platforms that really have teens hooked, but also using the platforms to collect data on children. We'll be talking to Jan Vermeulen, editor of My Broadband, about that story. If you've been skipping the hearty meals during this winter because of expensive meat cuts like oxtail, you'll want to listen to this one. We'll be talking to Paul Matthew, the CEO of the Association of Meat Importers and Exporters, and a misunderstanding with these health certificates coming out of Argentina, making sure that oxtail, that price has shot up over the past few months. We'll be talking about that a bit later. Then a market commentary covered by Viv Govender from Rand Swiss. I'll also talk about there with the NVIDIA results and also how the markets performed today. Later on the show, Business Unusual, looking at pay transparency in South Africa. Lindy Wesibesho, MD of REM Channel, about South Africa's shift towards greater pay transparency and why simply publishing salary and pay gap figures is not enough. Consumer ninja Wendy Nola catching a counterfeit con at cash converters. She'll tell us what happened in that particular case with our shapeshifter later on the show, just after 7:30. Linda Meyer, the professor then from the Rosebank International Group. All that and more on The Money Show. Let's talk money.
The Money Show
on 702. Let's walk the talk.
On 92.7 or 106 FM and DSTV channel 856.
Major story coming out of the US. As adults, we're also hooked on social media, if you're being honest, doom scrolling and going through all these social media platforms. Those that are fully addicted will want to make sure that they've got enough likes, they've got enough people following them. And that sort of addiction can cause problems, especially for younger minds, children, teens that will rely on social media to make up what would be their personality. And 29 US states are taking on Meta, the owners of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, to say, look, we need a new redesign that will make sure that these kids are not as hooked to these platforms, and you can't use these platforms to collect data on the children. It was a big case, and Meta facing a $1.4 trillion charge for this particular case, but they've decided to settle out of court. Let's now catch up with Jan Vermeulen about this particular story, editor at My Broadband. Jan, I think if you look at the number $1.4 trillion, which would be the worst case scenario for Meta, they've dodged a bullet here by deciding on the settlement close to $18 billion.
Yeah, so it's a common tactic in the U.S. legal system is to go big and force a settlement, and because that then gets chalked up as a win for you, whoever is prosecuting the case, and so yes, the thing I think that worried Meta most was the thing was set to go to jury trial. Now I'm speaking a little outside my area of expertise here, because what I know about the U.S. justice system is what we all have learned on through movies and TV shows. But the bottom line was it was going to go to a jury trial, and then you've got to convince 12 people that you, the big corporation, are not trying to be evil, and the chances of winning there are not that good. And so much better to take the loss in terms of paying the settlement, but not admitting any wrongdoing, than to risk going to jury trial and then being on the hook for many more billions, if not, as you said, $1 trillion. Which, I mean, I think even these big tech companies would feel $1 trillion to the point of, having to make significant cuts or going under.
In the 1990s, the tobacco firms were sued in the US, for the health reasons, for actually making sure that they don't get new smokers. Is this the tobacco moment for the tech industry, or is it another way of dodging it? Because I would imagine that Meta has this kind of money in their war chest, and this won't really pinch them anyway.
Yeah, $16 billion. It's not nothing. Look, anybody, if you, we throw billions around, and so the Guptas have kind of desensitized us to billions. But $16 billion is just an obscene sum of money.
Yeah, 252 billion rand.
Yeah, so they're not paying that with a smile. Make no mistake. But your analogy there, the tobacco moment for the tech industry bears pausing on, because and there's a debate worth having there. Is social media as harmful as tobacco? Now, physically, no. There's at least no data to support that. We're talking about mental well-being here, right? So that's far harder to measure. But it's an interesting question, and you're not the first person to raise that analogy. And there's a huge discussion in the United States where this case is being heard, about whether, that is a good equivalency.
And the main reason I was asking that, Jan, is because, with that tobacco moment, we saw the change in advertising for smoking. We saw the labeling on packages, how harmful it could be. So you were sort of warned as a consumer, but I don't assess that we would find the same with social media, because like you said, it's an easier way for Meta to walk away from this without admitting any guilt.
Right. And also, I mean, one has to wonder, firstly, how much good did those warning labels on smoke packs
Sure, it's
do?
debatable.
Yeah, but what probably did make an impact is the advertising changes, is getting rid of the Marlboro Man and like how cool it is to smoke and all that stuff. So when I was a teenager, it was still cool to smoke, but it became progressively less and less cool, to the point that there were fewer and fewer smokers, and then the switch to vaping and all that stuff. And so, if similar interventions, not the same thing, because the same thing is not going to work. The same thing that worked on tobacco is not going to work on social media. But for example, in Australia, they tried this ban, banning all teenagers essentially off of social media. That hasn't worked. We just published a story today from data from a software company that does parental control software, saying that there are now just as many teenagers on TikTok in Australia than there were before the ban, basically, and more in the tween group, in the 10 to 12 group. There's a greater proportion of them online and on TikTok than there were before the ban.
So like a shadow of social media for teens.
Yeah, and it's because it's a double-edged sword. It enables. It's not smoking, you could argue, is a double-edged sword as well, because it's a cognitive booster, right? It's a stimulant, not a depressant, and so there is some benefit to smoking, but the physical harmful effects far outweigh them. And so, but social media is not that. It's a form of connectivity. It's freedom of expression. It's all those things. But then on top of that, there's all these other harmful effects, from bullying to the effects of, the same effects we spoke about when we were teenagers, in the 90s or 2000s, about the magazine covers. It's exactly the same argument, just on steroids, because now it's not just magazine covers, it's everywhere. It's literally in every piece of media you consume. Is, here's this perfect body. Why don't you look like this, or look more like this? And so there's questions around a lot of questions around that. But it's honestly, it's the same argument we've had about mass media since visual mediums took off. And I'm pretty sure if you go back to like radio, like when radio first took off, the same kind of debates we had about the societal impact of radio. Just now for the social media age where the stuff is very widely accessible and a lot of user-generated content, which changes the equation tremendously.
We wrap, Jan, one wonders then if this won't play into the likes of TikTok and X, where a lot of these attorney generals in the US are looking for changes. The attorney general in California is saying a default daily time limit of 2 hours for users under the age of 18 that can only be lifted by a parent. A default blocks on notifications to users under the age of 18 from 10 to 7 a.m. in the morning. So looking for notable changes and not just settlements out of court, but I don't think it will be quite welcome by these platforms because advertising is very important and young people, of course, a big revenue driver.
Yeah, look, there are tremendous restrictions on what you're allowed to advertise to younger users in the United States, just as there are in South Africa. They're not allowed to be exposed to certain things, right? So there's huge regulations around that already. But yeah, the block that sounds very something China did. What I do like about what you've mentioned there is by default, which parents can lift. And so I'm all about that. Put the power in parents' hands because not all children are the same. Some children also are social media entrepreneurs or whatever. And so you don't want to, get too draconian about it. You want to make sure that there are some healthy defaults in place, but that can be overridden by a competent guardian. That's not a bad idea, and it'll be interesting to see if something like that works or if it just gets circumvented like what's happening in Australia.
Sure. Well, that was Jan Vermeulen, editor at My Broadband. I guess the conversation continues around how harmful social media is, especially to children and teens. But that big settlement coming out this afternoon for Meta Platforms, the owners of Facebook and Instagram.
The Money Show
With Moteo Haripe
on 702. Let's walk the talk.
I don't know when last you went to your local butcher trying to make something hearty, something rich in your household, especially during the cold winter months. But the price of oxtail has more than doubled in the market. The Association of Meat Importers and Exporters saying a technical error to do with health certificates from Argentina is driving up the price of oxtail in the country. The organization says the price of the protein source has doubled compared to the first half of the year. Now joined by Paul Matthew, the CEO of the Association of Meat Importers and Exporters. Paul, just what is the misunderstanding here between local authorities and the would-be exporters?
So what happened, there was a breakout of a disease called scrappy in Argentina, which basically affects sheep and goats. But our health certificates that we use to import beef tails into South Africa had this definition of scrappy in the health certificate. So what we did, we requested the agricultural department to remove the word scrappy because obviously state veterinarians in Argentina would not release products. So, which they did, but they then went and basically changed the entire health certificate importation and made it all around FMD, which now has actually blocked the importation of beef tails or oxtails as we know it. The issue here is that Argentina hasn't had FMD since 2006. So yeah, it's an absolute mess. It's
not a technicality, but definitely affecting the price of the good in terms of oxtail. I mean, we import about 70% of Argentina's oxtail. Somebody listening to this will say we have a fair bit of cattle in South Africa, so why don't we just supply our own using our own cattle? But we do also consume quite a bit.
Yeah, it's the South African consumption, let's put it that way, and the demand for oxtail. So obviously we're coming out of winter now, so it's very popular in the winter period. And as South Africa, 100%, we have a fantastic beef industry, but we cannot supply enough. So we cannot meet the demand that the South Africans consume. So what has happened, the reason why you're now sitting with oxtail that was probably around about 79 Rand a kilo is way up around about 199 Rand, almost 200 Rand a kilo. So what the retailers are doing to ensure supply and that they have oxtail on the shelves, because they're not getting supply, they can't just slow the demand down. So therefore, it's so expensive. So once again, South African consumer who's so sort of battling as it goes, we're feeling the effect as a consumer because government has made a decision that is technically just, we can't understand it. So
has there been any final word from the Department of Agriculture to say we view this as a technical error and we're willing to fix it as soon as possible, because the prices going up also brings us back to the inflation conversation in South Africa?
Yeah. So, yes, we have. So what we did as the association, we've actually written to the head of the animal health in agricultural. We've also had, obviously, the Argentina embassy also pushing from their side. We saying, you know what, we don't want to change biosecurity. Obviously, biosecurity standards very important to protect the country, to protect local herds. But we've now requested on how the decision was made, what scientific evidence was used to make this decision. Because if you look at the World Health Standards, you have a look at Argentina as a country in terms of their FMD program, understanding that South Africa is using their program to fight our own FMD in the country. So our vaccines are coming out of Argentina. The whole program is an Argentina program. So what scientific evidence did they use to make that decision to really stop the trade? So, yes, we have requested in writing now.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's the same old story. You know, it almost falls on deaf ears. We're waiting, and we send reminders, and we're waiting. But we haven't had a response yet.
All right. That was Paul Matthew, the CEO of the Association of Meat Importers and Exporters, just explaining why the price of your oxtail at your local butcher is up at 200 Rand per kilo. So don't fight your butcher. There's something happening in the background.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Bit of a flat, weaker day for the JSE All Share, down 15 points. Industrials were up close to 0.5%. Banking stocks disappointed. Mining shares also flat. Viv Govender here, a portfolio manager at Rand Swiss, to try and break down the numbers locally and also what's been happening international. Viv, welcome again to the Money Show.
Thanks for having me.
That U.S. inflation number, are you reading it as now for the Federal Reserve having time to maybe increase rates, or just leave it where it is because at 3.7 is still above its target range?
Most certainly. But then again, I think the inflation rate in the U.S. has been above the target range for about 5 years so far. So this is just continuing that pattern. I do think that the U.S. Fed has had a huge amount of credibility built up over time, but it's really eaten into it over the last, several years because, like I said, when you have almost half a decade or more than half a decade of, above inflation, of target inflation, and you're not in a pretty aggressive rate hiking cycle, it does indicate that you're not quite as dedicated to inflation targeting as you might be, pretending to be.
Do you think then the U.S. Federal Reserve will move up instead of down?
I think it's going to be a rather dovish Fed. I know it was, when the new Fed chair got into power, he basically did come out, in his first speech and say that he was going to be quite, aggressive and quite, just trust me, we are going to be targeting inflation, etc. But prior to that, speech, I think the general perception in the market was that Trump chose him because he was quite dovish on interest rates. And so I do think that this Fed is going to be very dovish in interest rates and not likely to really push interest rates higher unless it's really forced to.
And then those NVIDIA numbers, the chip company, one of the largest in the world, basically seen as a barometer for the state of the AI market. Last time I checked, I couldn't see those results. I don't know if they're out yet. At $92.2 billion is the revenue that's expected. What do you read that number, especially with, the big push on the market to say AI is actually a thing? It's backed up by numbers.
Yeah, look, I mean, NVIDIA is an incredibly profitable company as well. So we talk about, $90+ billion in terms of profit. But you also think about the fact that this company also has incredibly high gross margin as well. Because of the fact that, according to some estimates, it's about 75%, is basically profit. So you make 90 million, you're going to get 75% of that, basically coming to you as pure profit. And that is the kind of, numbers that are really unusual, especially compared with the fact that, yes, it's under 100 billion, but it's growing, at leaps and bounds, from, quarter to quarter. What the markets are looking for here is whether or not the trend is continuing, whether or not we continue to see this, almost exponential growth in terms of earnings and revenue coming through, and whether or not there's any kind of, impact that happens by the margins. One thing to note about NVIDIA is that it's been quite aggressive recently about trying to diversify, trying to invest in like a number of other AI companies. Maybe they are seeing an end to this part of the AI cycle where, the hardware makers, particularly the chip makers, are really benefiting extraordinarily.
Well, that was Viv Govender, portfolio manager at Rand Swiss with that market sweep. The Rand at 15.98 against the US dollar, 18 Rand 63 against the euro, 21 Rand 73 cents against the British pound. Is not being backed by commodity stocks today at 4,600, the price of gold for an ounce, while platinum at $1,848 an ounce. Brent crude up 3.5%, unfortunately at $89.08 a barrel. But that is, of course, the market sweep then with Rand Swiss.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, welcome back to the Money Show. As promised on Monday, I did say this is going to be a results-heavy week, and we continue crunching those numbers. Now looking at Blu Label Telecoms today, coming out with its numbers, with profit taking a hit, and with the headline earnings per share dipping 82%, with net losses of 4.8 billion rand. Doesn't read like a good scorecard, but there is a story behind that. A lot of business happening behind that. The letting go of Cell C and letting it list independently, and the third-party business also buying into it. So there's a lot to dissect with Brett Levy, Blu Label CEO, joining us for those numbers. Brett, just a sum up of just what a busy year it's been for you guys in trying to restructure the business.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I think there's a lot behind the story. I think we reported it on in our February results. For us, it was a good year. We got Cell C to a listing in November of last year, November 27th. And the loss that you've seen is obviously the conversion from the debt to equity that we did in order to get Cell C to a part where they had very small debt and get them on their own route on the market. So it reads the way it reads, and it obviously is mainly because of the Cell C listing. But overall, Blu Label Unlimited had a good year. Cell C now on their track, and Blu Label back to basics and back to what we do.
And it's a fair assessment to say we're looking at a brand new Blu Label, if you will, seeing that, a lot of, the workings in terms of Cell C and others have been stripped out, and you're looking at your own bottom line now. And I'm sure you're looking forward to a better, simpler future.
Yeah, I think, Blu Label has obviously performed pretty well over the years, and that was able to generate cash. And that is what we used to obviously get Cell C to this listing in some difficult years. So I think the Blu Label core business has performed pretty well over the years. And now it's really about concentrating on what we do. It is a cash-generative business, and going back to what we do, let Cell C do what they do. And, together, we believe it will be a good story.
There was a net profit of 677 million rand with core headline earnings of 75 cents per share. What parts of the business are you looking forward to generate more of this revenue going into the next year now that the business is done?
So we simplified it. That's what we did. So what you're looking at is actually the pro forma of what Blu Label achieved without the Cell C noise, if I can call it that. So an EBITDA of just over 920 million and a net profit after tax of around just under 680 million. So for us, it's really two plays. It's, our vouchering and our distribution, which we positioned well in the market, and, we have a lot happening in that side. And then for us, without doubt, the most exciting thing that we've seen for a long time is blue energy. We're playing a lot in the green energy side, so maybe we should be called green energy and not blue energy. But, there's a lot to do. I don't have to tell your listeners, but, the electricity world is probably twice the size of the telcos world, and we are really positioned well for the future. There's a lot to do at municipal level. There's a lot of opportunity for us and a lot that we could do good for South Africa as a whole in this place. So a lot of focus on Blu Label energy.
Talking green, is that a sector that needs a lot of certification? And have you found that to set up, blue energy, you'd have to have gone through a few hoops?
So we had to apply for a trading license, which we received about 3 months ago, so we're able to trade. From the actual licenses of build, there's certain rules of what you require if you build over a certain amount of kilowatts. So, where we build, which is under the limit of where there's certain requirements, so it's a lot easier. But we're finding that the industry actually moves very quickly from a certification point of view and from a licensing, if I can call that, it works well. The obstacle is really we deal at municipal level, and, it's not straightforward. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot to do, but it does take time at municipal level. But the actual regularity side is good, it's solid, and we're positioned well. We have the licenses we require. We're playing in the complete ecosystem, if I can call it that, and not just part of the ecosystem.
There's still a lot of competition with vouchers and merchants, and you're hearing telcos now when they report on results talking about things like that. Are you finding it more competitive, more robust, or have you put yourself in a better position where everyone wants to partner with you?
Yeah, I think the market has been pretty much the same for years now. I think it's a very competitive market. We have very strong opposition in the likes of a Shop-to-Shop and a Flash and a Pepcore, Lasaka group. So, it's the same people that have been in the industry, but we seem to have our own markets that we deal in this big market. You do overlap with competition, and competition is good. And, we've got to make ourselves valid forever. So, it's not just telcos, by the way. Electricity vouchering is probably as big for us, if not bigger than telcos vouchering. You have ticketing, bus ticketing. You have gaming, which, has gone absolutely crazy. So it's about vouchering as a whole. It's not about telcos at all. Telcos is a piece of it now.
And as we wrap up, you now have a new dividend policy. Mind telling the shareholders what that looks like now?
Yeah, I think that shows exactly where Blu Label is. So two parts of it. We've obviously reinstated our dividend policy. From a Blu Label core point of view, going forward, that we'll pay between 30 and 50% of all net profit that Blu Label achieves during the year. So that's good, and paid out in a cash dividend. And then over and above that, whatever dividend gets passed through from Cell C to Blu Label, we're actually going to pay between 50 and 70% of that, either in a cash dividend or dividend in species back to shareholders. So it's been a bit of a long journey for shareholders, but I think we're showing that shareholders come first, and that we're going to return to them what they deserve and what they should get.
I'm sure they went through the pain with you, and we'll be waiting for those profits. Brad Levy, Blu Label CEO, just cutting down those numbers that came through over the past year.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, proud to support Genza Energy's investment in the infrastructure powering West Africa's growth.
Welcome back to the Money Show. Still looking at the numbers, turning our attention now to food services multinational Bidcorp. They also had their set of results come out for the financial year ended in June. Revenue up by 2.8% year on year to 242 billion rand, while its trading profit also increased by 6.5% to 13.8 billion. Bernard Berson, CEO of Bidcorp, joins us for this conversation. Bernard, you spoke about an increase in the company's cost of doing business. What exactly was driving that up? An increase of 19% there.
No, I don't think it was an increase of 19%. The increase in the cost of doing business kicked to 19% of revenue. I think it was 19.1% of revenue from 19%. The cost of doing business is what it costs us to warehouse and distribute our product, of which the primary cost of that is labour. So we face inflationary labour pressures. We've obviously faced fuel increases over the period, particularly the last few months. But our cost of doing business has been relatively stable from year to year.
You operate in a lot of economies through your business. What have you seen in terms of trends? Are you seeing a slower global economy? Are you seeing other countries do better than other economies?
No, I think overall, economic growth is relatively stagnant in most countries around the world. But notwithstanding that, the consumer is under pressure, but is still active. And we've managed to get growth. Our revenue grew on a constant currency basis over 5% in the year. And we actually saw an acceleration of growth in the second 6 months, which is a little bit counterintuitive based on the disruption of the war in late February onwards. But that positive momentum has continued.
Did you see a change in some of the units that you provide to your 500,000 clients, maybe products that did better than others?
Not particularly. We're relatively broad spread in our product range. I think our portfolio is about 400,000 products. And that depends on the market and the customer base. So whatever the customer needs, we provide them the opportunity to purchase it from us. So we've got a very broad range of product to a very broad range of customers.
We've seen some stagnant numbers in terms of food inflation, which is a good thing, I guess, for consumers. Food inflation going down. How does that affect your business?
Food inflation, we think, is running overall in our portfolio in the low 1% area. There was talk that food inflation was going to accelerate following the impact of the war on fertilizer. There's still some talk that there will be some food inflation. A few years ago, we had very high food inflation across the world, in the region of 15 to 20%, which is very difficult to navigate. We've also had periods of zero inflation. So it is what it is. We manage accordingly. I think that inflation is going to tick up very slightly to the 2% area, maybe 2-3%, which is manageable. I think people can tolerate those types of inflationary increases.
You're a very big business. What sort of efficiencies have you looked at in terms of your operations and getting things done as quickly as possible? Are things that you've modernized?
It's a constant evolution in our business. It's a constant striving to do things better. We are a very high service model. You order it tonight, you get it delivered tomorrow morning across multiple temperatures, multiple product ranges, different date availabilities of product, shelf life of product. So we've always embraced technology, and we continue to. AI obviously presents more opportunity. We are exploring that in various different manners around the world, but none of them are huge projects that are going to shift the needle in any great way. They all look at a various aspect of our operation and bring efficiency to that. So, it's a constant process of refining what we do and improving what we do.
Bernard, you had a very big appetite then for some acquisitions. Can you tell us about those and their contributing factor to these numbers?
Organic acquisition is very much part of our DNA. It's what we do. The year we just finished was a relatively slow acquisitions year. We only made 5. They were relatively small. Didn't add a whole lot in the year to the overall result. But the small acquisitions compound and are a very important part of delivering organic growth going forward. in the new year, the year we're currently in, we've already concluded 4 transactions. So maybe we'll see a pickup in the pace of these acquisitions. But these acquisitions are all relatively small relative to the scale of the business.
And any concerns on that Strait of Hormuz? Is there anything that could affect the way you do business over the year?
It is having an impact. There are quite significant shipping disruptions globally as a result of displacement of vessels and alternative routes that vessels are having to take. But we manage that accordingly. We manage our supply chain accordingly. And yeah, the price of oil, the price of fuel is an important driver, not only in the cost base of our business, but it's a very, very quick impact on consumer confidence. So it does drive consumer behavior relatively quickly. So hopefully we see some stability in fuel pricing and a return to more normalised levels.
A very resilient performance that also brought some earnings for shareholders. I think more than 5 billion rand in that number. A good time for you then to give back a little bit to the shareholders.
Well, we've got a very consistent dividend policy. And in fact, we paid a little bit more this year. We've increased that slightly, the payout ratio. And we've also conducted some share buybacks. We think our share price is attractive at these levels. So we bought back over 1% of the shares in issue over the last few months, which is a return to shareholders in a different form. We're highly cash generative. So yeah, it's looking very positive on that front.
Very set of solid results there from Bidcorp. That was CEO Bernard Berson. Thank you so much for your time. Of course, Bid Corporation buying 5 companies in the past year, with these businesses already contributing well over 2 billion rand in revenue to the business. They bought Hodgson and Sale brand, a seafood wholesaler based in the northeast of England. Gruppo Alimentare, a food service distributor in Sardinia in Italy. And Chuan Yi, a food service distributor in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And Fridge Foods as well, a food service distributor based in the Eastern and Western Cape and here in South Africa, getting 100% of that company. And Baltimore, a fish processing business based in Poland. So really, really good network of businesses for them there.
And now, The Money Show with Moteo Haripe
on 702. Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, proud to support Genza Energy's investment in the infrastructure powering West Africa's growth. We've covered a lot of topics here on The Money Show tonight, looking at those Blu Label telecoms just before the headlines. Their results are looking quite mixed, if you will. They went through a year where they let go of Cell C officially and let it list on the JSE, and now are operating a bit lighter as a business, then looking to go into the green energy space, but also living that the merchant area as well for airtime and things like electricity vouchers. That's still a strong part of the business for them. Brett Levy, Blu Label CEO, saying the business is ready to go into a new year, a bit lighter, having let go of Cell C. And then Bidcorp, the food service business, also having a very, very good year. Our shareholders getting around 5.2 billion rand there from their year in operation. But now we focus on something that everybody worries about. We just came from the 25th of the month, and people will tell you they're waiting for their salaries, and those waiting for their salaries on the 30th as well. But what we never really talk about, even as colleagues amongst ourselves, is just how much we get paid. And I've had conversations with my own colleagues around pay and, being transparent with it. We might love each other, but that number really never comes out. And that conversation then we're going to be having now with Lindy Wesebesho, the MD of REM Channel, about South Africa's shift towards greater pay transparency and why simply publishing salary and pay gap figures is not enough to create greater fairness in the workplace, with the New Companies Act requiring bringing prescribed pay gap disclosures into the spotlight. We'll be talking about how that is likely to affect the workplace and why it would work as well. Welcome to Lindiwe Sibeshu. Welcome to The Money Show.
Thank you very much, and good evening to you and the listeners.
Good evening. Now, people don't often talk about their pay. It's even hard for me to say it. It's hard for people to talk about their pay. What more when companies have to disclose just how much who is getting paid? I'm sure it's going to be very difficult.
It will be, especially because, as you say, we are not necessarily a country that openly discusses pay, how it is determined, whether it is fair or not. We don't always appreciate that. And now we are going to see the public and, state-owned companies that are required now per the amendments in Section 30A and 30B to disclose not just the executive pay, but also, the total remuneration that is received by, the lowest paid employee, for instance, the average remuneration of all employees, the median remuneration, as well as the pay gap ratio between the top 5% and the lowest 5%. So that will start creating, I suppose, conversations. And I think in the article, what I was saying is we need to start understanding what these numbers mean.
And just how transparent are we talking? Is it just medians and, top and bottom and leaving it at that? Or are we looking at the entire workforce to say, this is what people in your department are expected to earn? And what is the main focus of having this particular act?
So it's really to put a lot more accountability towards fair and equitable pay. This is obviously the vertical pay gap because it looks at the top and the bottom. But as we know, the Employment Equity Act already requires that people should be paid fairly and equitably, especially those that are doing work of the same value. So we know that there is the equal pay for work of equal value perspective. And organizations usually have remuneration policies. They have pay scales. They need to be very clear in terms of how those are determined so that it drives appreciation, and then hopefully people will start also understanding what it is that they need to do to progress in their pay.
I mean, we've seen and reported on these stories, whether it's a retailer or a bank, just the disparity in pay between perhaps a CEO and the lowest paid worker at the company. Yes, we do find out what the numbers are, but what is the change that is being targeted by this particular law?
It's really fairness at all levels. As I said, these are vertical pay gaps, and you will never necessarily close the vertical pay gap. So I do want to emphasize that this is not about expecting closure or expecting that the lowest paid employee will now suddenly be promoted to such a level that they get paid the CEO salary. That is not likely to happen. So what this actually requires is that there is an appreciation that every person at the level that they are working needs to be paid fairly for the work that they are doing, not necessarily to close the vertical pay gap. What needs to be emphasized is the horizontal pay gap. In other words, people doing work of largely the same value need to be paid fairly relative to the pay scale that determines the worth of that role. So we should be focusing on that, making sure that there are no differences that are, for instance, due to gender, due to race, and so on, for people doing the same value work. In as far as the vertical pay gap is concerned, Mateo, I can tell you now the supply and demand patterns for roles at the top and the level of complexity of roles at the top versus those at the middle as well as at the bottom is totally different. So that is not necessarily the focus. The focus is just making sure that there is accountability at organizational, line manager, as well as remuneration committee or board level to make sure that every employee is paid fairly for the job that they do.
We'll get into who's responsible to make sure, everything is checked and crossed, right? But I want to talk about people who will tell you that I'm in the marketing department, but also I'm helping out the sales guys and also doing a bit of admin at the company. Even with large corporations, you have people doing multiple roles, but only getting paid for one. Will this aid that type of approach?
So employees obviously need to look at the value of the roles that they're doing. Some people do additional work because they want to progress, they want to develop. It's an opportunity to set yourself up for promotion, and there's a whole lot of other aspects of pay that can be looked at. For instance, short-term incentives could be used to recognize for the additional work that people take on. So you need to again understand all the different elements of pay. There will be fixed pay, which is really linked to the job, but there may be recognition, which can come in the form of both financial and non-financial recognition. There are incentives which can be a reference for how well you have performed or what additional responsibilities you have taken on. So it's important to have an understanding of all the type of pay elements and not only focus on the fixed aspects of pay, including benefits for that matter. It's very important to understand what benefits are part of your package. How can you ask that only the benefits that really matter to you be optimized to make your package more meaningful to you and your job.
And who will be responsible then in the company structure to manage the governance of the remuneration, keeping to Section 30A and 30B?
So there's a lot more accountability in terms of oversight committees. So typically your remuneration committee needs to make sure that the policy of the organization sets out clear principles of pay, including fair and equitable pay as part of that, and that the disclosure in the remuneration report includes all now the prescribed ratios that have been put in Section 30B of the Act. So the REMCO, or the Remuneration Committee, now has a clear accountability over and above what they already did in as far as King 5 is concerned. But it's not only just the REMCO. Internally in the organization, your leadership, your line managers, and employees themselves need to make sure that they read and understand the policy of the organization. They ask their line managers relevant information around their pay so that they too can understand what it is that they need to do to progress and make sure that they, as they look for better opportunities, but also as they perform in their jobs, can actually stand a better chance of being paid fairly and equitably.
Let's have a bit of a case study then. If a JSE listed company perhaps has an AGM and doesn't quite agree with the remuneration policy for perhaps, let's say, that year, the pay disparity between a CEO and the lowest paid worker, if they don't agree on it in that particular AGM, how do they resolve that particular issue?
So there's two aspects. So Section 38 talks about the binding vote now that comes into effect in as far as the shareholders of the organization. So at the AGM, those shareholders now will vote for the approval of the remuneration policy. And that approval threshold is now requiring 50 plus 1%. So if they don't approve that, it then means that at the AGM, next AGM, the company needs to illustrate how it has addressed the issues that shareholders would have raised as a reason for not approving that. So the threshold does drop because in the non-advisory or non-binding environment, it was, 75%, and then there would be engagement if they didn't meet that threshold. But secondly, annually, they are also expected to vote for the implementation part of the policy. It says the remuneration report, but technically it actually is looking at how the policy was implemented, and that's where the ratios also come in. They are in the implementation part of the report. So again, that is now a binding vote. So if the shareholders of the company at the AGM do not approve that, same process applies in terms of at the next AGM, the REMCO and the board technically must then explain what has been done to address those issues. There's also then a consequence. It's called the two-strike rule. This basically means that if there is no approval after the second time, so the NEDs who serve on the REMCO may continue to serve as directors if they are re-elected, but they are not eligible to serve on the REMCO for 2 years thereafter. So this is much more stricter than it was in the past, which means that those NEDs really need to make sure that the policy as well as the implementation report are sound enough to pass shareholder vote, because there is then the two-strike rule consequence that comes after a second failed vote. This is a lot more emphasis on the accountability that these oversight committees now have to be held according to. So very, very important to have the right level of focus at that REMCO level.
But this fair pay bill also plays into even before you apply for the job, right? Things like salary history reliance, where a company will be asking you what you used to earn at your previous job, or requiring pay ranges in job advertisements, and protecting employees who discuss pay.
Absolutely. So that fair pay bill is not yet law, but it's obviously a bill and it's doing its rounds. I think there were comments that were invited for the public to provide its input, but you're absolutely right. It's also moving in the direction of enhanced transparency, and it will definitely look at making sure that historic salary is not necessarily used for future performance, and also requiring that job advertisements actually include a clear pay range so that people know what the job that they are applying for actually potentially pays, and what that range from the minimum to the mid to absolutely the higher end of that scale would look like. It also provides for protection for those employees. Like you said earlier in your introduction, we don't really talk about pay.
No.
But in the fair pay bill, there will be some protection for employees that choose to have conversations about their own pay.
But it's all good and well to have these acts, to have the fair pay bill being proposed, but it's also going to be important for employees to educate themselves around the change in rules and what this means for them and their pay. So things like pay literacy and knowing where the company's pay policy actually lies, maybe HR teams having workshops so workers know how these things are turned.
Absolutely, Mdeo, and that is really my argument, to say transparency without literacy will just end up being sensationalism. We need people to understand pay and how it is set. The policies must be read. The principles and the architecture that informs pay decisions need to be taught. We really need to create an environment where we do talk about pay in a way that is helpful for people, so that they can also self-advocate. Otherwise, we are going to be seeing all these headlines, but what really are we going to do about them? It's very important to understand, especially for young people also coming into the workforce, how pay is set and what it is that they can expect for the skills that they have learned, and how they must actually execute on those skills in the job that they do from a performance perspective, in order to also get more than just the fixed salary, as I said earlier, to understand how performance-based pay is determined. So I am really hoping that this drives a better appreciation, or at least a need and a demand for more education around pay, and for more open and empowered ways of having pay conversations. It adds to the whole financial literacy and ultimately financial well-being.
That was Lindiwe Sibesho, Managing Director at REM Channel, in our Business Unusual feature, talking pay transparency in South Africa. So you see, you can have a chat with your colleagues about who's getting paid how much. Also, just educating yourself about the acts and how things have changed in terms of pay discrepancies within companies.
The Money Show.
Consumer Ninja.
Joined by Wendy Nola to talk about consumer issues that she's handled of late. Wendy, welcome again to The Money Show. Looking at the counterfeit con, buying something at a second-hand store. You think it's real. You get home, you find out it's not quite the original thing. What is your recourse?
Hi, Mutta. Yeah, a bit of a different one for me this week. I had a complaint from a chap called Mitchell Burter, who went to Cash. Got to think carefully because they're two similar ones. Cash Converters, a branch up in Gauteng, Meadowdale Mall to be exact, and he bought a Spaderco knife. And when he got home, he had a good look and he thought, something's just not right here. I think this is fake. So he takes it back. And he's told, no, you can't get your money back. This is a grudge purchase. You just don't want it anymore, and so you can take something else. So he did take another knife. He paid an extra. but it didn't sit well with him, and so he brought the case to me. And I thought it was worth highlighting because there are quite a few little bits of interesting pieces of legislation that we as consumers would do well to know about. So, okay, so his point was the store hadn't advertised the knife as authentic, but the fact that it didn't say a knockoff or copy or whatever. If you see a brand
it
name
wasn't
on a product,
warned prior that it's not the official thing.
Yeah. And legally, the Consumer Protection Act, it's true. If you buy something in a store, so you've had a chance to touch, feel, try on, whatever, you don't get a legal right. You don't have a legal right to take it back and say, I want a refund. That's not footstoots. If it's defective, yes, you can demand a replacement or your money back. But if it's a change of heart, then you don't have that right. It's got to be defective if you buy it in a store. If you buy it online, different story, but you won't go down that road. So his point was, it wasn't a grudge purchase. It was a change of heart. It was because it was missold. This thing is not genuine. I paid for a genuine knife. Anyway, so the manager's response was a little concerning. So I took up the case with the owner, the chairman of Cash Converters. Section 641, I pointed out, it prohibits false, misleading or deceptive representations, which this appeared to be. And also another law, Section 2 of the Counterfeit Goods Act, makes it an offence to have counterfeit goods in your possession for trade purposes. In other words, for these second-hand places to sell them. And what's interesting is that you commit the offence not only if you knew or had reason to suspect, but if you didn't take reasonable steps to avoid selling something that was counterfeit. So you can't say we didn't know.
Yeah.
And there's a fine of there's a 5,000 rand fine on first conviction. Anyway, I got a really good response from both the director of the company, Richard Mukabe, as well as the director of that particular franchise. And it's quite unusual, quite refreshing, I have to say, Mateo, when they go, mea culpa, shouldn't have happened, here's how we're fixing it, moving on. And I really commend them for that. So, and presumably that manager is going to get some training. But essentially, he said, it's apparent that we dropped the ball. These companies always get me when they start with such honest admissions. We dropped the ball, Mukabe said, specifically with how we handled Mr. Boerte's return of the knife to the store. The customer was entitled to a branded item, of course. And of course, it wasn't a grudge purchase. He said,
but were the knives actually counterfeit?
Yeah, they were. They turned out to be. They've whipped all the knives off display, taken them off sale. They're going to pursue, because obviously somebody sold it to them, the knives to them. They're going to pursue a criminal case. They're reporting it. They identified that counterfeit identification needed to be improved, and they are writing a new training for that, which, I mean, as I say, an excellent response. Mitchell was refunded the 1,300 rand, 1,300 he paid in total for the two knives. As I say, the batch has been withdrawn. And this is interesting, Mateo. He said, these fakes were good enough to get past a trained buyer, yet a careful customer handling his purchase back at home sensed what our process did not. And so they're not happy with that, and they
maybe they should hire him,
which is good news. Yeah, maybe he's got a career there. They said every verification step they used to consider adequate is now being treated as potentially obsolete. And just a really nicely handled complaint, a nice result for, keep using that word nice, a satisfying result for the complainant. They're refunding him, they're acknowledging the problem, they're doing more training. And when it comes to buying secondhand goods, obviously look at them as carefully as you can before you leave the store. And if you later think, as Mitchell did, that you were sold a fake, don't let anyone tell you you can't bring it back. It's a change of heart, grudge purchase. We don't have to take it back. It's not defective. The point is, it's mis-selling. It's not. It was passed off as a authentic
it's still the
brand,
responsibility of the brand that sold it to you.
Yeah, and if you're in any doubt, you could go to the actual brand for verification if necessary. But I really like this case for the outcome that me taking up the complaint had. Let's hope that filters through to the whole business. But yeah, good and well done to the complainant for not just accepting it and, taking it further.
Another consumer victory for our consumer ninja, Wendy Nola, the counterfeit con that was caught in action there. And a good, a cut for the knife lover there who bought that counterfeit product.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
And we're in conversation with Professor Linda Meyer on leadership, education, and the future of work. She is our shapeshifter tonight. Professor Linda Meyer is the managing director of Advertex Rosebank International Group, which includes Rosebank International, the Waterfall School of Business, and Capsicum, the culinary studio that they have there. She also serves as the president of Rosebank International University College in Ghana and is the visiting professor of Nelson Mandela University. She joins us tonight for a riveting conversation about her career and how she became a shapeshifter in her industry. Professor Meyer, welcome to The Money Show.
Good evening, Mateo. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Did you always imagine that you'd be in education for the rest of your life as growing up, or were there other industries you were looking at before you got into academia?
Well, certainly before I got into academia, my very first job, I was a flight attendant for South African Airways. And from there, I became a full-time trade unionist. And I've served in many, many roles, as a CCMA commissioner and within the Department of Justice. So I had a long and expansive career, both in the public and private sector. But at the CCMA, I had this wonderful opportunity to get involved in education. And when I was involved in the trade union movement, I was very fortunate when we brought the current QCTO system, the vocational and training system, over to South Africa from the Canadian and German system, that I participated in that. And then I moved into academia, into various lecturing roles, became a dean eventually, and now serve as an administrator, but always an academic at heart.
Is that something that happened organically as you went through, different jobs and you found yourself saying, look, I want to study further. I want to grow deeper into education as a career form. And I want to find myself, changing policy and also making sure that the advancement of education in South Africa is at a better state.
Absolutely. So, Mateo, the important thing for me is, my mission, and I think it's well known, is to democratize education. And that's why I've worked relentlessly to ensure that we have access to education. I worked for Universities South Africa, where I was the director of operations, effectively the COO, responsible for the 26 public universities. And my mission then moving into the private higher education sector has been to democratize education because of the limited spaces that we have in our public higher education space, and obviously the volatility that we have there, to really create a viable alternative. Given that we have the second highest youth unemployment rate in the world, it's very important that we start focusing on the systemic changes that we can make. And if we look at our youth unemployment rate on the expanded definition, over 60%, the official definition, 43%. But for those with degrees, it always only vacillates between 10 and 12%. And that is where we really can make meaningful change and start having significant impact on the futures of the youth and the futures of South Africa.
For many people going through varsity or maybe a schooling after matric, they possibly just do their qualification, get their degree, get their diploma, and keep it moving. Why was it so important to you, as you say, to have sort of a democracy around education and making sure other people other than yourself got a better education?
Well, the important thing is that I've seen firsthand what education does. I myself have never not been enrolled for a degree since the day I left school. So for me, it really is, I've seen the power and the difference that education has made in my own life, but I've also seen in the lives of the individuals that I have been very fortunate to work with over the years, where I've seen security guards becoming senior managers, where I've seen petrol attendants become chief operations officers, become serious business leaders just because they had the opportunity to access higher education. And this is a meaningful way in which we can invest in our people. And I completely believe in this because I have seen firsthand what the power of education can do in completely taking somebody on a trajectory where they felt absolutely hopeless to where they are now creating employment and are serious business leaders within the South African realm.
You've had more than 3 decades in the higher education industry in South Africa and elsewhere in the world. When you look at the access to education, when we're talking funding and financing, where do you think we're still getting it wrong in South Africa in terms of making sure there's more people that are backed to get into their studies?
Well, the biggest problem that we currently have is that we don't have a coherent funding mechanism. So NSFAS, I write on this extensively. NSFAS is one of those state institutions that has done remarkable work, notwithstanding being a completely inept government institution. So they have created the opportunity for 5 million students to gain degrees that they never would have had otherwise. NSFAS obviously only funds students in TVET colleges and public universities, and they only fund undergraduate degrees. So they play a very important role. But if we look at our funding mechanism currently, after 2018, we know that education, higher tertiary education, is now free for our university students. But many of our systemic challenge is that every year we have about 750,000 matriculants that write. We have about 600,000 of them qualifying for tertiary studies. So around 345,000 for degree studies, another 200,000 for diploma studies, and then higher certificate studies. And we only have 230,000 first-year spaces available in our public universities. So we can't, as taxpayers, invest in taking people through school, because we know almost 70% of our students in our schooling system are from SASSA beneficiary households. So what do we do with this human capital, this great potential that we have? We need to find vehicles to fund this in a systemic and sustainable manner. And that is why we're advocating for the system to be very different. So, for example, income contingency loans. If somebody earns a threshold of 30,000 and pays back 1,500 Rand a month, that is not unreasonable to keep the fund sustainable. But also, if somebody immigrates, they should pay that entire amount back. It's costing the South African taxpayer around 2.5 million Rand to train a doctor. Now, if somebody leaves our shores, that's money that we could be investing otherwise. So Australia does that. They make you pay the money back that government has invested in your education.
And I guess it would be to a good network and system if that happens, because there are others that are coming behind you who actually also need the funds. So making sure that those funds are recouped to actually benefit the next group of students is quite important. And my question then would be, do you think in its current format then would have a NSFAS breakaway and going to something else that would be more sustainable for South Africa?
So I think we must accept that we have students from poor and working class families, and if we don't have a government system, they won't be able to access funding. So we need also a system for those students that are in the missing middle, 350,000 to 600,000, that we have government underwritten loans at a very low interest, so that those students are also not left out of the loop. So certainly we need to have a different system. I'm advocating that NSFAS, because NSFAS costs us as the taxpayers 1 billion Rand just in their operation cost. And they spend about 1 billion Rand outsourcing the work that they do. And for every 1 billion Rand, we could fund another 9,000 students. So the mechanism currently, if we look at the university budget, so the university budget is within the Department of Higher Education and Training. So they get about 153 billion Rand. About 95 billion goes to the university branch, but every year that amount is more and more of that money is being given to NSFAS. So this year it was around 54 billion, but then NSFAS overspent by over 10 billion. Now the universities have to balance their budget. So every year when NSFAS takes more money, it means there's less money for the universities. And that's why we're seeing this huge impact now on the system, where universities are owed over 10 billion rand by NSFAS, and some of them have really, some of the universities are owed over 1 billion, and they are struggling to pay salaries, they are struggling to meet their fiscal obligations. So the system as it currently stands needs a complete overhaul, and most importantly, I'm advocating that we put that into the university branch of the DHET. We pay the universities directly, as we do with the other billions of rands, because all NSFAS does now as a middleman is they get the information from universities, and then they have to verify that, and then they have to pay the universities, and the universities in any event then pay the students. So let's get rid of the bureaucracy, exactly, and the burden of administration that is really compromising our system.
In your years in education, I'm sure you've had experiences that have, turned your perspective either on education, on leadership, or something that inspired you to do things differently. Some of those anecdotes that you'd like to share with us.
Well, certainly there are many leadership lessons that I've been very fortunate to learn, and I've had absolutely exceptional leaders that I was very blessed in knowing. And if I think, I had a boss, Professor Ahmed Bawa at University South Africa, the most humble man who spent time in solitary confinement, and he taught me about patience and that everybody has a voice. Because it's not very easy to sit, Matea, as you know, and listen to people when you disagree, so really to find a space to hear everybody coherently as a leader. And then if I think of my current boss, Jeff White, he's a strong commercial leader, and the humanity of leading people. So I've been very blessed in knowing very, very credible people. If I think about Bettina Engelbrecht, who's now the CEO of the Clicks Group, she was my boss at South African Airways, and how she taught me about humility and seeing people for who they are. So I've been very blessed in all of those realms, and those positions have strongly influenced me. I always believe in certain principles in leading people, but that we have to lead with humility and humanity if we really want to make a substantial difference in the lives of the people that we lead.
That is important to strike that balance, right? But you've served in the public space as well as the private space, as you do now with Advotech. What do you think should be the balance in terms of education and the quality of it between the public sector and the private sector?
Well, absolutely. There should be absolutely no difference. And, public and private institutions are subjected to exactly the same accreditation process. So you have to submit, the Council on Higher Education evaluates all programs, public and private. For public institutions, you're already deemed a university by Act of Parliament. And for private institutions, you have to go to a very rigorous process to get your license to operate in the space. And everybody's qualifications are registered with the South African Qualifications Authority. And the Council on Higher Education audits both the public and private higher education sector in exactly the same realm. So there is absolutely no difference. But the one thing we must stand relentlessly for is that we don't compromise the quality of our tertiary education. We have the best universities in Africa, and they are globally competitive. But the one thing I do not want to see, Matteo, is a situation that we find ourselves in now, where private higher education already represents 30% of the market. Our public higher education sector is only growing at between 1 and 1.7% per annum. The private higher education space already 30% of the market. And if we don't start investing in public infrastructure and public universities, by 2042, the private higher education market will overtake the public higher education market. And that is not good for any country. We need to find a balance, but at the heart of everything, quality must never be compromised, because then we'll find exactly the same situation that we have in the schools, where parents are looking to private education because they feel, for whatever reason, smaller classes, that is their first choice. So really we need to find this balance and ensure the integrity, don't compromise on the funding of our universities, because this is a coherent system that produces the skills that we need for a strong economy.
In conversation with Professor Linda Meyer, someone with an insatiable hunger for education, who's the managing director of Rosebank International Group. Join us for more conversation after this.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, proud to support Genza Energy's investment in the infrastructure powering West Africa's growth.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
And our shapeshifter tonight is Professor Linda Meyer, Managing Director of Rosebank International Group. She said it herself. She's never not enrolled in a degree since leaving school, and her academic qualifications tell us that story, including a PhD in Management of Technology and Innovation in South Africa, a doctorate in Business Administration in the US, a master's in Business Administration in the UK, and a postgraduate diploma in Management in the UK, and a Bachelor of Commerce Law and a Bachelor of Business Administration as well. So quite well versed in the different spectrum of South Africa's education, whether it's the private sector or the public sector. I want to zero in on your leadership style. What would you say is your leadership style, given the many lessons you've learned through academia and education that you've gotten, but also some of the mentors that you shared with us before the break?
Well, I think my leadership style is a visionary one. I set a vision with my team, and I then relentlessly work on removing obstacles out of the way for my team. But I also surround myself, Matteo, with people that are better than me in each field. So whether it's my CFO, my COO, my head of marketing or sales, head of legal, whatever that may be, I ensure that those people have a skill and a competency that far outweighs mine, because otherwise I just end up doing that particular work. So very important to surround yourself with strong people and to work relentlessly to ensure that they have the resources and that they employ the right people. Certainly, it's not always easy. We have situational leadership also. You don't always deal the same way that you do with a senior leader, that you deal with a junior individual in the organization. But there are key principles that we can't move away from. And those are, as I mentioned earlier, that we treat everybody with dignity and respect. It doesn't matter who it is in the organization, and everybody has the same opportunities, and that you create an environment where people can flourish. So commission structures, variable incentives, all of those things that people, it doesn't matter at what level they are. They could be junior salespeople, but they could be earning more than executives in the business because they've put in the effort. So certainly creating that enabling environment. And when I look to the mentors that have taught me this, the list, Matteo, is infinite. There's not a place that I haven't worked, and I believe in this. When I go for an interview, I never work for somebody I don't like. It's not always easy. I'm sure there are people that don't like me that
what would
have
that
had to
be for
tolerate
you? Would
me.
it be a smile, a handshake? How would you determine whether you are likely
Access.
to work well with someone? Okay.
So access. So often people are nice in interviews, but when when the chips are down and you really need them, they know where to be found. And I'm not saying that you have to have access all the time. But if the chips are down, they must be in your corner, and they must be there to support you through difficult situations. So that is what that looks like for me.
And what would you say to a younger Linda Meyer as she started out her career, as she went into academia, as daunting as maybe the task was at the time? What would you say to them now?
Well, I think the first thing is that you must balance what you do. But I would also say thank you for putting in the effort and the hard work, because there's no success that comes in life without investment of time, investment of commitment, investment of recognizing those around you and taking people up with you. Matteo, I have people that have been working with me through different organizations, and we cross paths 30 years later, and to see their growth. And certainly to always keep those people in your network and your circle. And if you know that they are good employees, if you know that that's that person that you would go out and re-employ, that when those opportunities are available, that you make work of taking people up to the next layer as you rise within your own career and your own trajectory.
And for those that you've led, what do you want them to remember?
Well, if you ask anybody that I've led, they will tell you my 4 key principles, which is, that we are customer obsessed, whether it's internal or external, that we always take the long-term view, so we don't invest in anything that doesn't make the lives of our students or our staff better, that we really pivot and embrace technology and innovation, and that we live for operational excellence in everything that we do. So I certainly, when I see my employees and they are able to recite these foundations back to me, my heart smiles.
All right. That was, of course, the voice of Professor Linda Meyer, Rosebank International Managing Director, working with that Edvitech Group, one of the fastest growing education groups in the country, giving us her view as the shapeshifter.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, proud to support Genza Energy's investment in the infrastructure powering West Africa's growth.
And that's the show we had for you tonight here on The Money Show. Tomorrow you can look forward to the Industrial Development Corporation results as we break down more numbers here on The Money Show. Of course, looking forward to you going to our podcasts and searching some of this content that we've had for you for tonight. But for now, stay in the black.